Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on the High Heat Network. Daryl Jenny alongside Joseph Landini and Richard Raymond. Going to talk to you a little bit about some high-quality NCAA basketball action. Virginia Commonwealth University against Butler. This upcoming Saturday will be your first Final Four event. And guys, I'm not sure about you, but I definitely did not have either of these teams in my Final Four despite last season's results for Butler. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down each team, and then we are going to talk about a little bit of some of the important players to look for in this game. And then we're ultimately going to give you a selection as to who we feel will come out on top on your right side of the bracket. Let's start with Butler, guys. You know, they had the big win over Pitt. What were some other things that really led them to the Final Four?
Butler had to beat a lot of good competition going into the Final Four. They beat Florida in the Elite Eight matchup. The big-time player for Butler, or at least one of the big-time players for Butler, was Matt Howard in that game. He did an excellent job on the offensive and defensive glass, pulling down rebounds. He made free throws in the later part of the game to put away the game against Florida. If Butler's going to want to succeed against VCU, Matt Howard's going to have one heck of a game.
Yeah, aside from that huge win against Pittsburgh, people don't realize they beat Wisconsin as well, which was another team on a high just running through the tournament due to the fact they had a chip on their shoulder from just not getting any credit at all. So with that, Butler defeats them and actually held them to over, 30% shooting or something, which is absolutely amazing because Wisconsin has been a shooting team all year. They have great talent, so far, Butler's defeated the best of the best, really, in Pittsburgh's, Wisconsin's, and then they go out and they win this past weekend, and now they find themselves back in the Final Four, which is purely amazing just based on the fact they don't have Gordon Hayward anymore, who really was the focal point and the leader of last year's team, which lost, if it wasn't for a few seconds, they win the national title. So Butler really has come into their own, and despite not having Gordon Hayward, they have players like Matt Howard and Shelvin Mack who have led this team throughout the year, and now they're back in the Final Four where basically anything can happen, and it's revenge for them.
So Butler having one of the most difficult roads. I would say that Kentucky ultimately probably had the most difficult road, but to be able to go out there and beat the Big Ten, the Big East, and then the SEC in order to get here is definitely something to be said for them and their competition and their head coach, Brad Stevens. We'll move over to Virginia Commonwealth University and talk a little bit about how they got here. That is actually the university that VCU stands for, in case for those of you who didn't know. Virginia Commonwealth University this past weekend able to upset Kansas, and then they were able to beat Florida State as well. But their journey really starting at the beginning when they beat Georgetown in the first round. Guys, Virginia Commonwealth University, an uphill battle, no doubt. From an 11 seed, they had to win a play-in game to even get into this tournament. So go ahead and start, and let's talk about them.
This may be the most improbable Final Four contestant ever. We're talking about a team that came into the tournament not supposed to being in the tournament, just based on the fact that the Virginia Techs and the Colorados of the world are just sitting there shocked on Selection Sunday. And then they hear VCU's name, and VCU's there. They start by doing great things early in the tournament, pulling that 11-6 upset. And now they've just been rolling based on the play of Joey Rodriguez and Jamie Skeen. And honestly, with all this, it's really kudos to them, even though they didn't have to play Notre Dame because they got bounced early. They still beat a very tough Florida State team who plays great defense, which we talked about this past week. But, VCU's coming in here winning the most games in the tournament because they had to play that play-in game first. So VCU might be the most tired, but they do have the most heart. This game is going to be a very interesting one.
Yeah, I really look forward to this VCU-Butler matchup. Like Joe and Daryl just said, they've won 5 games to get to this point already. No team has won a play-in game ever and gotten to the Final Four, so their run is remarkable as an 11th seed. They're the second 11th seed to make the tournament since Georgetown. Not Georgetown. George Mason back in 2006. And I think this team is not only led by its coaching, by Shaka Smart, but it's led by their point guard, Plan Rodriguez. He's the floor general out there. He led them through that Kansas game. He did take a couple wild shots, but he's the player to look out for in this VCU Butler game. He's going to be the difference on the floor if VCU wants to make it to the national championship game.
And again, Virginia Commonwealth University did get to play Florida State over Notre Dame, which is something that Joe talked a little bit about. So their road may have been a little bit different if they did have to play Notre Dame. But if you watch that Notre Dame Florida State game, you're pretty confident in the fact that Notre Dame did not deserve to be in there. And then they come out and just really own a team like Kansas in the first half, and then able to hold down their fort and their lead, and even extend the lead at some points during the second half of that Kansas game. Really shows you the type of grit and toughness that Virginia Commonwealth has, and that VCU is going to be able to use against Butler. We'll now take an opportunity. We'll pass it around the table here as to who is the most important part of Butler in this game. I know Rich talked a little bit about Matt Howard earlier. We'll go to him first.
Yeah, like I said, I think Matt Howard is going to be the player to look out for in this game. He's an offensive juggernaut. He pulls down rebounds. He averages close to 20 points. He averages close to a double-double every game. He scores around 17 points, pulls down just around 10 rebounds. He gets the job done on the floor offensively and defensively. So if Butler's going to want any chance to win this game, it's going to be a big part on Matt Howard's shoulders.
Honestly, you can talk about how great Matt Howard is just because he's probably the most known name of all. But the fact is, Butler doesn't get this far without Shelvin Mack. It's just the honest truth. He's the point guard of this team, and he's the scoring point guard of this team. And honestly, without his 27 points against Florida, the clutch shooting against Florida, they don't get there. Matt Howard can do all he wants to do, but Shelvin Mack has arguably been the best point guard and guard in this tournament. I'm not going to argue for it because I think Brandon Knight of Kentucky has been, but still, Shelvin Mack has played better than any other guard he's played against so far, and he's going to have to do it against Joey Rodriguez. So in order for Butler to win, it's going to have to go through Shelvin Mack. Matt Howard's great and everything, but I feel like Mack is less replaceable than Howard will ever be.
And I'm going to actually go with a non-player. I'm going to go with Brad Stevens and maybe the Butler fans. I think that Butler needs to have a strong following in Houston in order to, really overtake the crowd and try to make it a little bit more intimidating for Virginia Commonwealth. Butler has been there before, so I think that their tournament experience and their tournament background can help them out being in the national championship last year. But ultimately, Brad Stevens has to be able to game plan against Shaka Smart. These two coaches are young. They're both relative newcomers. They're up and coming. They could be of the next line of great coaches. But definitely Stevens has to do an excellent job of motivating his players and doing a good job of reminding them that just because they were here before doesn't necessarily mean that they are entitled to win this game. They themselves are an 8 seed, so just because Virginia Commonwealth or VCU is an 11 doesn't necessarily mean that they're that much better on paper. Stevens has done an excellent job to this point of being able to have his team prepared for teams that are from better conferences. But it's going to be interesting to see how he approaches a team that's technically comes from a worse conference and not as high of a seed as they are. So it'll be interesting to see Butler come in as the favorite according to seeds. We'll now move over to VCU. We're going to start with Joe. He's going to pick out the most important part of the game for VCU and what they're going to have to do in order to win.
Well, obviously, Joey Rodriguez has had a great tournament, but the last game against Kansas, just the constant and continuous play of Jamie Skeen was just phenomenal. Skeen from the inside against the Morris brothers, from the outside against Morningstar, was just through and through the best player on the court, despite what anyone has to say. Skeen is going to have to really go up against Howard at points. At other times, he's going to have to go up against Shelvin Mack. So in order for VCU to pull off this upset, seeding-wise, they're gonna have to run it through Skeen, because quite frankly, I don't think Rodriguez can man up and be physical against Shelvin Mack because he's so built and in good stature. Like, Rodriguez is great, but, I mean, I'm just saying, Skeen was the reason why they beat Kansas. Kansas is a number 1 seed and arguably probably the second best team in the whole tournament. So Jamie Skeen's the reason why the VCU has beaten the Pac-10, the Big 12, the Big 10, the Big East, and the ACC. I just think it's Skeen, and they're going to have to run it through him, and he's going to have to play well.
Skeen is a great player, and if Skeen's going to want to have a good day against Butler on Saturday, the ball is going to have to be run through Rodriguez at some point. He is that floor general on the floor. He does an excellent job of the dribble drive at the top of the key, getting the ball inside the paint, and dumping the ball off underneath, especially to guys like Skeen, the other bigs that VCU has. Rodriguez also does have a nice outside jumper. He can be a little erratic at times. I noticed during the Kansas game, he took a couple deep threes late in the game, which could have cost him because a couple of them he just front ironed or back ironed. They weren't high quality percentage shots, but Rodriguez does do a good job of ball handling, and he will have to find his bigs on Saturday against Butler if VCU is going to want to have a chance at winning this game.
So obviously, as you said, Skeen and Rodriguez are going to both have to have successful games and successful outings. And like Rich said, Rodriguez is going to have to shoot at that higher percentage. But it all comes back to coaching again. I talked about Stevens. We're going to talk about Shaka Smart now. Smart is undefeated in the postseason. And it takes a special coach to be able to do that. Only a handful of coaches in any sport are undefeated when it comes to playoff time. Again, he's been preaching the underdog all season. He's been preaching that they're the team that's been disrespected, and that's actually Butler's mantra usually. So again, it's going to be interesting to see who can really overcome that underdog aspect. As you know what, VCU was able to beat Kansas, but were they able to beat Kansas because Shaka Smart had convinced them that no one thought that they were going to win and they didn't belong in the tournament? That gets a little bit old after a time or two that's been said. So I feel like that he's going to need to come up with something new, something fresh, and something different in order to motivate his team this Saturday against Butler. And we will now toss it around for some predictions on the game. We'll start with Rich. Let's get a prediction and who the game MVP is, for one team or another, whichever team wins.
Both teams are coming into this game on Saturday very confident in themselves and their abilities. Both head coaches have a lot of trust in their players. I'm going to have to give the edge to Butler in this one. I think it's going to be a dogfight on Saturday night when it comes between these two teams. But like Daryl and Joe both mentioned, Butler has the experience of being there last year. They do have a lot of returning guys. And I think the play of Shelvin Mack and Matt Howard and the team around them is just a little bit more talented than the team that they're playing in VCU. So I'm going to give the edge to Butler. It's going to be a slight edge. I wouldn't be surprised if this game went to overtime. And my game MVP will most likely be Shelvin Mack because he's one of the more talented players on the floor. I think Matt Howard will have a good game, but I think Shelvin Mack will be the bigger key in this game if Butler's going to win.
All right, so basically, Rich just made my prediction the same way. Butler, the reason why Butler's in the Final Four is because they have the experience. Butler, I don't think this is going to be a close game, really. I think it's going to start close, but then the experience and the tenacity of Butler and the defense is really going to put shackles on Skeen and Rodriguez. I talked about how Skeen is great and everything, but in all reality, he's got to do it again. I don't think these kids from VCU are going to have the heart and passion to do it. I really think they're going to fold under pressure when it comes second halftime. I think this is Butler's game to lose. They have the experience, they have the heart, and they are going to prove they're the real Cinderella. And ultimately, they're going to get in the Final Four, and they might win this whole thing.
I'm going to have to differ it up a little bit. I think that VCU is playing better team basketball right now. I think that Butler's leaning a little bit heavily on Mack and Howard. I think that Shaka Smart's going to have his team ready to play, and as much as I love Brad Stevens of Butler, I think that Shaka Smart is going to outcoach Brad Stevens in this game, and I don't think it's going to be close at all. I think that VCU wins this game by 8 to 12 points early, and I think that they finish it out, and I think that they move on to the national title game. And for who I think that they will be playing, please tune in to our next video blog here. I'm Daryl Jenny alongside Joseph Landini and Rich Raymond. Thank you for joining us on High Heat Network here. And please tune into the blog at blogspot.highheatnetwork.com.